everyone. I think we've got a packed schedule, so I'm going to move things on if that's okay. I'm Fionnuala Sweeney. I'm Head of Film and Architecture at the Arts Council, and I'm very pleased to be here today to chair this session on culture. For those of you who don't know, the Arts Council has a statutory responsibility for architecture as an art form. We are interested in growing a critical awareness and a valuing of architecture so that everyone, everywhere, benefits from a culture of high-quality architecture in Ireland. We are concerned with the living architect, and we have a particular interest in buildings of significance from the 20th century onwards, which contribute to contemporary architecture culture. We also very much value our architectural past and support its contemporary adaptation for continued use, to further sustainability, and to build our future heritage. Our own architecture policy, Championing Architecture, which I think you have there, it aligns with the national policy on architecture and especially its objectives for quality and culture, which is what we'll be hearing about today. This morning, I'm delighted to be in the company of Michiel Riedijk of Neutelings Riedijk Architects, Graham Bell of Europa Nostra, Sarah Woods of the Office of Public Works, Gerard Carty of Grafton Architects, and Valerie Mulvin of McCullough Mulvin Architects. All of the architects you'll hear from share a commitment to designing and realising sustainable architecture of excellence that delivers high-quality outcomes for the public. This is at the heart of their practices and is in keeping with Baukultur and the New European Bauhaus, and in Ireland, the state's national policy on architecture. On that note, I'd like to invite Graham Bell to introduce proceedings by providing an overview of the European policy context, and we'll then move on to hear about exemplar adaptation projects built or in the process of being built by our contributors in Belgium, France, and Ireland, and these will demonstrate policy in action. We're going to keep things running tightly so that there'll be an opportunity for some discussion and hopefully questions from the floor afterwards. So I'll hand over to Graham now to begin. Thank you. Just press that on to the phone. Thank you.
Good morning. It's great to be able to address so many heroic people who you may not feel when you came here that you're going to be heroic, but certainly by the time you leave, you will be committed to being heroic in the cause that this event is all about. And I want to start with alerting you to the fact that because time is so short, a number of my slides have QR codes in them. So if you have a camera, then photograph the slide, and at your leisure, you can then scan the QR code and follow up the link. If you're quick, you might be able to do it while the slide is on, but I suggest that'll be even more of a challenge. So who am I? Who are we? Europa Nostra is the largest organisation, the largest NGO in Europe in terms of civil society addressing cultural heritage. We're active in more than 40 countries. We have 240 member organisations, and we have 100 associate members. So that's municipalities, institutions, and others. And then we have 1,500 individual members. So we have a constituency that we represent in discussing, raising issues, and then acting in terms of what this event is about, and many others. So a theme of my introduction for this panel session is about how do you define quality? In all of the presentations that you're seeing today, how do you measure quality? Because in a sense, quality is not quantity. It's something different. It's something that it's sort of intrinsic. It's something inherent in the way in which you do things and the way in which you look at things. And if you cannot identify quality, how can you then go on to say, no, we want to push further and we want to raise standards and make the values that we hold even higher. We want to represent high culture, Baukultur. And in a sense, this event is about encouraging everyone, enabling people to raise standards, but you have to know where you start from in terms of what quality is. And I don't know, how many of you are architects? Oh, loads. So in your training, you would have hopefully been told about Vitruvius. 1st century BC, firmness, commodity, delight. So way before all of these reports were being considered, you were already learning as a professional how to bring together those three essentials of quality architecture. Firmness, something which stands the test of time. It has built-in, the long life, loose fit principle. Commodity, that it can have an economic, cultural, or social life. And delight, that there is a pleasure, that what you're doing lifts the spirits. Hopefully, you're all doing that on a daily basis anyway, but today is about sharing that more widely. Now, the genealogy of the reports that you've seen, Euro-European Bauhaus, the Green Deal, and so on, are all trying to find ways in which we can raise those standards, in which we can achieve higher quality. And this slide looks at the renovation wave that was part of the Green Deal, setting targets for 2030 to 2030. We're in 2026. We're more than halfway through this. How much of this have we actually achieved? And if anything, I feel as though in some respects we're going backwards, because we began with the optimism of seeing performance and reuse as being something that, yeah, of course we're going to do that. It's just how we get on and do it. But inevitably, cultural heritage has to compete against other political and economic agendas. And so what we find is that somehow quite often we're on the back foot. We're trying to say, no. What we're doing really counts. It really has intrinsic merit that can deliver against other agendas. Somehow that argument is such a struggle. But this slide really is showing one dimension of what architecture can do. It's about the energy performance. It's about the KPIs of how buildings can perform if they are adapted successfully, not just in terms of reuse, but in terms of reducing their carbon emissions. So this is, again, something that is a real challenge for us, because if we look at urban regeneration, that's one typology. But if we really dig down into individual building types, there are some which are particularly difficult. Let's say redundant churches, something like that, where in a sense the architectural significance is something that you cannot compromise through trying to improve energy performance. And I want to give an example how I trained as an architect, I worked as an architect, I worked on urban regeneration, I worked on a reasonably wide range of projects. But my frustration as an architect was that I needed a client who had empathy with what we were trying to do. And quite often that was missing. So eventually I crossed the fence to become the client, and in a sense tried to then change things from the other side. And this is an example where I felt that the role of architects as creative industries, and perhaps you don't think of yourself in that sense, but as enablers, people who can see beyond the horizons of contracts and projects, people who can see the future, who can see what is possible. York is an example where you would think York, it's got one of the highest densities of protected buildings in the UK. And you would think, surely York, we don't need to discuss York. It's going to be all right, isn't it? Well, no. And the survey that we did looked at the use of this conservation area and the individual protected buildings. And what we found was that about a third of the upper floors of these buildings was either underused or disused altogether. And you think, but hang on a minute, surely it's where everyone wants to be, the economy, the culture, the community. But the nature of the buildings was such that the physical constraints and the way in which buildings are valued was an inhibitor to progress. So the first point to make is that the buildings have 90% of their market value at ground floor level. That's where the money is earned. So if someone is leasing a building, 90% of the value is at the ground floor and only 10% on the upper floors. So where's the incentive to invest in the upper floors? Not just in terms of their use, but in terms of the access and all of the other things that go with that. The other barrier that we found is that, broadly speaking, the property commercial world is divided into residential and non-residential. And so the commercial world, which is driving the ground floor future, isn't interested in residential because it's a conflict of two different types, two different communities, two different ways of valuing, two different types of tenure. And it was a real problem to try to persuade the market agents to reconcile that differential, to unlock the potential of the city centre. And as you can see at the quote at the bottom, what that meant was that if we could bring that 1/3 of floor space back into use, then we could accommodate between 1,000 and 1,500 people, or we could create employment for up to 4,000 people. These are not small numbers. These can have a profound economic impact. But the other thing which, as architects looking beyond the individual properties, the thing which consistently, in terms of urban regeneration, unlocks potential is infrastructure. And that can be in terms of accessibility, but it can also be in terms of all of the utilities and other aspects. So this is the challenge that I felt as an architect, trying to persuade not only the council, but particularly the property market, that heritage actually has capacity. If we then apply that across Europe, we're then looking at all of the historic towns, the cities, and the challenges that each of them face. And one of the ways that Europa Nostra celebrates achievement is through the awards programme. And you can see on the left-hand side those in Ireland that have received awards previously. I'm hoping, and you're not allowed to say this outside the room, that white gap at the bottom will be filled during this year. But the point I'm making with the main image is that you take a place such as Cluj in Transylvania, is that they're facing different challenges to you, but they're also facing similar challenges in terms of this relationship between appreciation for the past, the creative potential of architecture, and how that feeds into the economy. Yeah. So, where is this leading? First of all, I'd like you to look at this QR code and follow up on the Davos Baukultur Alliance. This is a global initiative, and Ireland isn't in it. We need Ireland in this initiative. It doesn't even cost you anything. So that's not the barrier. Why do we want you in it? Because it's looking holistically at design and conservation within the context that I've described. And going back to Vitruvius, if we elaborate that into a series of issues, what this shows is the ways in which the KPIs in which cultural heritage needs to perform. Going back to York as the example, here is another one. This is looking at what you do from an economic perspective in terms of the capacity to create value from quality. And then to close, I want to give an example of, we've already heard about the Krakow Declaration. We've set up a hub in Krakow, and the reason for doing that is it provides a focus for all of the organizations across all three sectors to come together and coordinate not only a voice, but an impact in terms of the value of cultural heritage in the life, not only of Krakow, but the Visegrad 4 countries. And so my parting comment to you is, we've set these up across Europe, Athens, Venice, Lisbon, and so on. Why not Dublin? And I'll leave you with that thought for the conference in November.
Thank you, Graham, for such an informative overview and for your call to action. Is this on? Yeah. I'm now very happy to introduce Michiel Riedijk, Founder-Director of Neutelings Riedijk Architects in Rotterdam, to deliver our keynote. Neutelings Riedijk Architects is known for excellence in design and sustainability in architecture, and is a leader in the development of cultural, public and mixed-use buildings in the Netherlands, Belgium, France and beyond. Thank you. Michiel.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here this morning.
Here a match is for gentlemen.
You're there. No idea. Sorry.
I'll try to... I prepared a lecture which dwells upon 5 different buildings. And the question arises, what is heritage and what do we consider heritage? 5 of the buildings I'm going to show to you were considered to be demolished. And eventually 2 of the 5 buildings were considered to be completely demolished because the structure was derelict and the building was completely out of use and in quite a deprived state. Next to that, I would like to dwell upon what it brings if you consider repurposing a building and what it brings if you consider repurposing a building a sustainable manner. And I have to apologize for my English. The last time I delivered this speech was in French, so it's quite something. Graham was just referring to Vitruvius, and for us, Vitruvius is, of course, something very important because we always claim that we have a kind of new way of approaching Vitruvius, and that eventually, of course, everything is about beauty and sustainability and collaboration, in a way repurposing and rephrasing Vitruvius in a contemporary manner. I am not going to explain this, since I got the instruction that I had to keep a very limited, concise lecture and speed up. So I'm also not going to consider these buildings, which are all new and which are all about collaboration and about collaboration that repurpose, in particular, the collaboration with artists, poets, and other professionals from other fields of expertise in order to make a building that is grounded in its particular place on Earth. And it was already mentioned before, also by Olaf in his speech. I think it's key that a building is grounded on one particular place on Earth, and art and poetry and other expertises can help us with that. And I'll try to show you that in the coming slides. Next to that, there are all kinds of ambitions that relate to what repurposing and adaptive reuse might bring and might cater from. And what is key for us is that the building you find as an objet trouvé, I don't know the English word for that, the objet trouvé, the found object, yeah. The objet trouvé, for that matter, brings another quality that you couldn't have designed yourself. And the objet trouvé, in a way, propels your thinking in a completely new manner, and also offers you design questions that will bring you to another level of quality and another level of thinking about architecture in general. So, 5 buildings. The first building we're going to discuss is a former freight station in the heart of Brussels. Then we're going to discuss the former headquarters of a petrol company. We're going to discuss a former orphanage. We're going to discuss a former mill on the Loire embankment. And we're going to discuss former police headquarters of the regional police in the city of Deventer. This freight station was established as part of the colonial agenda of one of the Belgian kings, Leopold I. As you might have known, a large, substantial part of Africa was his personal possession. And let's say we will not dwell upon the colonial exploitation that was a result of that, but primarily he thought that Brussels needed a sea station in order to bring in the goods without paying taxes to the heart of Brussels. So this freight station was an entrepot station, so all the customs were, let's say, taking place in the heart of the station. And it became operational in 1906, and there were no passengers there, so only goods were entering into the station, and the station was kind of beautiful, splendid, heroic structure built to glorify, of course, the presence and power of Leopold I. So the building is 300 meters long, 180 meters wide, and consists out of this kind of beautiful cast iron structure. However, since we're talking about Europe, in 1992, the building became obsolete. So, as you might know, the Treaty of Maastricht came into power, and there was no reason to have any custom declarations anymore for goods shipping into the heart of Brussels by train. So the Belgian Railroad Company decided to sell this former shunting yard and to get rid of it, basically, because the ground was polluted, the buildings were in a very bad state, and eventually they didn't know how to use it. So the whole premises, it's a vast site in one of the most difficult areas of Brussels. That is an important detail that you should take into account. I will get back to that. And after 1992, nothing happened in this building. So this building was in a very, very difficult state. And the company who obtained the premises from the Belgian Railroad Company is called Nextensa. And after years developing other parts of this former shunting yard, they decided not to demolish the building, because the building was considered to be completely demolished. And they started renovating it. And of course, the renovation was quite difficult and costly. Next to that, since the cast iron structure was very well engineered, the building could not support any additional weight. And as you all know, since timber is 5 times lighter than concrete, eventually, as I will show to you, we decided, after being asked and winning a selection, we decided to execute everything in full timber in order to allow the existing structure remaining and without any reinforcement in the existing foundations and the existing structural work. So basically what we did, we restored and cleaned these 380 meters premises. We took away all the elements of the case, and we stored this and we repurposed it eventually in the landscaping of the building. And then we added 10 blocks, 10 different blocks. And these 10 different blocks are all completely timber-based structures and completely prefabricated. By doing so, we didn't have to move the former roof of the sheds, since, as you might know, you need very large cranes if you would have had a structure executed in concrete. since everything was conceived in completely prefabricated CO2 timber, we were able to mount everything as a kind of Lego pieces on site under the sheds. And of course, eventually, we also repurposed and renovated the exterior. So what came and what is important is that, as you might have seen in the ground floor, we had these 10 blocks positioned in the side base of the former station. That allowed us to create this kind of very generous middle bay as a covered square and as a new public space for this very difficult neighborhood in the heart of Brussels. So by doing this, let's say the main objective was in fact contributing this new public space, besides adding, of course, 50,000 square meters of offices to the premises. We added this substantial new public space. I will not dwell upon the kind of sustainable performance of the building, but as you can imagine, by repurposing these 7 sheds and allowing for these 10 new timber buildings in it, a kind of new energy positive and a new use of the soil and the surrounding area came into being. Funnily enough, I realized this morning that the pictures I will show you first are pictures taken during the COVID pandemic, so the building seems to be completely empty if you look well. So I'm saying, yeah, we made this new public building and there's nobody there. As you might see, the people are wearing mouth masks on this picture. Anyway, so the full station was refurbished, and what is very interesting right now that is it is this kind of new destination in Brussels. So since it's part of this very difficult neighborhood, they needed new public space. And so by making this very large, generous, covered open air space, which is open 24 hours a day, and which is also receiving everybody, a kind of new public destination came into being. As of course, the exterior is beautiful. You should visit it. I'm rushing a little bit. So the next building is a former mill in Nantes. It's again the competition we've won in Nantes, repurposing a very large industrial mill where all products produced along the Loire River were shipped to and then were processed, and then from this quay along the river were sent into the world. The structure was designed by a French-Belgian engineer called François Hennebique. François Hennebique was the inventor of a certain procedure, concrete production procedure. It's one of the 2 guys in the upper left-hand corner. The other one is Jules Verne, the French author and lawyer who was born in Nantes in 1828. And the mission of repurposing this building was also to eventually create a new museum dedicated to Jules Verne, amongst other, in this building, celebrating in 2028 the fact that he was born 200 years ago. The mill, as I said, was produced by this structural scheme or structural invention of François Hennebique, but the mill was in a very, very dubious state currently, although the mill was a beautifully conceived building with gigantic cantilevering over the railroads. In the 70s, they decided to cover the building with aluminum sheets, and they also tried to repurpose the building as an office building. And the former concrete structure of François Hennebique was covered with extra concrete without actually covering the difficult nods between the structural elements. Since Nantes is in a seismic area, eventually they the fact that they didn't reinforce the structure in the 70s all causes quite some challenges currently while we're renovating and restoring the building. And while we're doing an inspection, all kinds of beautiful details come to the fore of the former structure of the mill. So the reason why we won this competition is that, in fact, we make a building above it. So we repurposed the structure of François Hennebiek as a new garden called the Jardin Hennebiek. And this new garden forms the heart of this building, whereas the museum for Jules Verne and the Cité des Imaginaires and a large public library and a new terrace overlooking the Loire comes around it and above it. So again, repurposing is possible by coming up with a strategy not working within the building, like in the case of the Gare Maritime station, but in this case, working above the building with a lightweight structure. This building, the third building I'm going to briefly talk about, was a former petrol headquarters. It's Petrofina, again, part of Belgian colonial history. Petrofina was, it's now part of a large French resources company, as they call it themselves today. Again, this building they were considering of demolishing it because it was not necessarily considered a monument or heritage. And we came to the conclusion that, in fact, the building consists or conveys an important part of the Belgian history, but also, again, an important part of the way Belgian history relates to exploiting natural resources. And we concluded that we should keep the building. It's on Rue de la Oie, which is one of the main streets in Brussels, where also the European Parliament and the European Commission are close to. And again, we decided to build around and above it. So in fact, as you can see in this section briefly, the former concrete structure is kept, and we put a new timber building above it and against it. And by doing so, all of a sudden, a complete new use is possible. Because previously, the building was consistent, or it had a kind of W floor plan. So we took away the middle bay, and we expanded the side bays with timber, and by doing so, it could cater, or the building can cater, contemporary office use and housing, because in Brussels, a functional mix of both housing and offices is mandatory. And we created this heart of the building with open soil that also helps you to enforce biodiversity and climate resilience in the inner city of Brussels. Two last projects are not in France and in Belgium, but in the Netherlands. This is a former orphanage. It's this is the real monument, or these two projects are about a real monument, because when we started with the Gare Maritime, it was not considered a monument either. This is the city, the former city orphanage of the city of Amsterdam in the time of the Republic. It was a former cloister, and after the 80 Years' War with the Spanish, the cloisters were taken over by the city of Amsterdam, and this cloister in particular was turned into a city orphanage for boys and girls. You see the boys and girls wearing the city colors of Amsterdam in their uniform. And in the 60s, as you all might know, Aldo van Eyck built this seminal orphanage outside of the city, and this building became empty when the new orphanage was introduced by Van Eyck on the outskirts of the city. In the 70s, they started repurposing and changing the building, and eventually, based upon the changes they've made in the 70s, we are now recreating the city museum. And again, we're intervening in the heart of the building with a very lightweight timber structure. As you all might know, all buildings in Amsterdam have a foundation on wooden poles. So in order to avoid that the buildings disappear in the mud, we have added new timber structures, and in the heart of the building we create this large spaces showing the night watches. So there's, I guess you all know Rembrandt's Night Watch, but in the time of the Republic, every 10 years, every 15 years, there was a new night watch, and they needed a painting, or they needed a picture, for that matter. And these buildings are still in the collection of the city of Amsterdam. And then the last building, rushing through my presentation today, is in fact the most, I would say, atypical building in this manner, because it consists a lot of new built structures as well. And the reason why I do want to show this is, again, about something we have dwelt upon previously. It's about creating local identity. And I thought this was interesting to show this morning, because, in fact, this was a competition we had won in 2008, and it was highly disputed. Because, as you might remember, due to the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, 2010, the citizens of the city of Deventer thought that it was not worthwhile investing in a new town hall, and that the city government should not spend money on new built structures. So what we did is we developed a kind of strategy to repurpose all the buildings that were surrounding the former town hall. The former town hall is the building completely on the right-hand side of the image. On the left, the full left-hand side, you see a church. That's not part of the assignment, but there's a small, or not a small building, but on the slide, a small building. That was a former club. I guess that's the right word in English, where people were gathering as a kind of community building. And the building next to the new built structure, the building on the right-hand side, was a former regional police station with cells and everything that comes with a regional police station. So what did we do? We repurposed and we connected all the buildings by making a kind of complete new connection on the first floor. And by doing so, we were also able to regenerate the urban fabric on ground floor. So you can cross the building, and by crossing the building, you enter into a set of courts, where this is one of the courts. And by creating these courts, and also creating courts within the building, a large part of this Deventer inner city, which is primarily a 15th and 14th century fabric, was completely rejuvenated and became into being. Here's the slide where you can see the set of courts and the set of back alleys that connect all these fragments of buildings. And of course, the reason why eventually this building was accepted and embraced by the people that were living around it and were living in the Deventer inner city was the fact that with an artist from Deventer, we had a large competition, and this artist won. And her proposal was to have a kind of community project integrated in the building. And the community program, or community artwork for that matter, consists out of fingerprints of more than 2,000 citizens of Deventer, randomly selected from the public administration. And the fingerprints convey the notion of community, convey the notion of being together, convey the notion of the importance of local politics, convey the notion of the importance of what the city administration does for you, and in a way also convey the notion of that repurposing building and art and architecture is very important in order to make your city great again. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michiel, for such an enlightening presentation and for fitting so much into 20 minutes. I think many of us will be travelling to see those projects. They're all wonderful. I'm now to our panellists. I'm delighted to first invite Sarah Woods, Assistant Principal Architect of the Office of Public Works, to detail plans on the National Concert Hall in a project that is being designed directly by the Office of Public Works. Thank you, Sarah.
Good morning, or is it still good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. Sorry now. Oh. Okay, so the first slide was actually just a visualization of what the auditorium in the National Concert Hall will look like, but that's fine because you may have seen it. But I suppose I'm going to keep it brief. Essentially, the redevelopment of the National Concert Hall is happening at the moment. We're in the throes of developing our tender documentation, and we've one phase of the work on site at the moment, which is the pathology building and the Discover Centre. So I suppose to just talk about the history of the site, because it has a really rich cultural history, starting in 1865, where it was a great exhibition palace and winter garden, which was integrated with the ivy gardens to the rear. So the top two photographs there represent what the building was like in 1865 on Earlsford Terrace and to the rear at the ivy gardens. Then in 1885, when it became the Royal University, it was given a somewhat of a facelift, and new buildings were added. The pathology building there to the left, which is the building that which is currently under restoration as part of a learning and participation centre. Then in the 1920s, the front section of that building was demolished and made way for the new university block, which is the Butler building, which you would recognise from today. So essentially, it's just to show how the site itself has adapted over time with new uses. And and then in 1980s, or the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, the OPW brought the National Concert Hall into the centre of an existing university campus. So it was shoehorned in incredibly difficult circumstances. And the more I work on it, the more I see how remarkable that was at the time. So it was like a classic case of adaptive reuse in the 80s, early 80s. So obviously at that time, the building was in the middle of the university, and UCD didn't move out completely from the campus until 2007. So there's been a project coming to this site for over 20 years. It's had a few false starts, and we're very hopeful that this is its time. And all of the things that have been spoken about already in terms of the economic, political landscape that's so important. And in order for us to be able to deliver on quality results, we need to be able to have the ingredients. So I suppose what I would say is the importance of understanding the site and understanding the history and the layers. So the image at the bottom, the coloured images, it shows the brown block is what's remaining essentially of the site since the 1865 building, and how the building blocks have developed, not necessarily intentionally, to be sitting next to each other. So some of the relationships are quite difficult and awkward, and that's what we're managing at the moment. So just moving on. Looking at some strategic moves, the key thing in what we're doing, I suppose, essentially, at the moment, the National Concert Hall occupies about 9,000 square metres of the site. When we're completed, the building itself, the concert hall will be over 20,000 square metres. And of that, there is a new intervention of about 5,000. So the majority of the building is about adaptive reuse. So it's the rationalisation and reuse, the clarity of circulation, the opening up of the building to reveal what it's really all about, because a lot of the areas are closed, you won't have seen, they're lying somewhat in dereliction, and so there's huge opportunity there. So this is what we're trying to achieve. Obviously, the auditorium is central to that, and that's our beginning. We have to bring it up to standards in terms of compliance with fire and universal access, and that's the same strategy throughout the campus for equity, for all, and to bring the public in, that the concert hall doesn't want to be seen as an elitist space, that everybody is welcome. And the architecture has a big part in that. So in terms of the acoustic environment, creating dedicated rehearsal spaces, improved artist facilities, delivery and access. So we have to look at the pragmatic side of delivering a project that will work. We have a huge amount of services that have been put in ad hoc over time. So it's talking about rationalisation of that and creating a future use that's really authentic, that people can come to and enjoy and appreciate. And so it's all about music, and the National Concert Hall is the centre for music, but it is also about public use and what brings with that. So it's just about, again, talking about opportunity, that awkward relationship between blocks that were never intended to stay together, because the Butler building was built and it was intended that the building in the centre would be demolished so that there would be future quadrangles and a more traditional university campus. But obviously that never happened. So what we're proposing here is the relationship between the front Butler building and then the central 1865 block is to open up what is currently a flat roof structure in between the two structures, allowing natural light and volume, and also to be able to articulate yourself in the space, because that's one of the key things in the concert hall. You go in there and you could be anywhere. It's very difficult to understand where you are and to orientate yourself. So then this is just to give a sense of the flavour of the history from 1865, when it was a sculpture gallery, the central section of the building, which aligns with the Ivy Gardens central path, and how the cast iron trusses, the natural daylight coming in through the void, then into the lower, what is now the John Field Room. So in the 1950s, it was a library for UCD. And then in 1979, you can see the works that the OPW were doing in 1979 in terms of bringing it up to make it the anti-space that it is as part of the John Field Room. So we're looking at how we open the areas out, bring back in the natural light. And in the corner image, you can see there, we're going to be opening it back out so you can actually, we'll have new roof lights, and the cast iron trusses are still in place. So there's something happening with particular images in my slide, but this is essentially, it's the connection. You can't see it there, but it's just, it was a high level image of the Ivy Gardens and how this is all aligned, and how we're opening up and removing staircases and making strategic removals of fabric in order to facilitate kind of future development. And that's it. And this is just to give you a flavour of what's to come. The new dedicated rehearsal and performance space for the National Symphony Orchestra. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah. It promises to be transformative, I think, for musicians and music audiences into the future. I'd now like to invite Gerard Carty, Director of Grafton Architects. Gerard is going to outline the work Grafton Architects are undertaking at another national cultural institution, the Crawford Art Gallery in Cork. Thanks, Gerard.
I think your slides are in the wrong order. Apologies. I'm just going to fly through these in this one next.
Okay, how do I go forward? Is this one here?
Oh, yeah, actually,
Okay.
it might be easier to use that chair. That's forward.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm disappointed there.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? We're delighted to be invited today to speak to you about the Crawford, and I think that this project speaks to the heart of many of the issues that were raised earlier this morning, and also particularly in relation to Baukultur. I suppose it's quite an ambitious project, and we were delighted to be selected to do this project. And I suppose what I will say is that when we think about existing structures, we think very much about first how you take care of them and how you value them. And that's the most important point to begin. But I suppose when we make new buildings, we're also thinking about shall we say, how we leave room for interpretation by inhabitants. So going forward into the future, how we make great spaces, and what are those great spaces? And we find that, I suppose, the virtue of great spaces is that they have a robust integrity, which, as we can see from the previous presentations, allow buildings to go through many lives, and yet the architecture survives, and we can say that the past and the present can coexist. So we were appointed in 2021 for this project by the Crawford and the OPW to transform its spaces, offering new possibilities to engage with the city and to meet the changing needs of visitors into the future. The gallery, as some of you know, houses a growing collection of 4,000 works of art from various periods and is a key anchor, cultural anchor in the life of the city. It's also a much loved institution, a much loved historic institution, and we'll be reimagining it within its tight urban footprint, which is quite difficult, as you can imagine. The transformation provides for the conservation of the existing fabric, a complete upgrade of the mechanical and electrical systems, adopting a more sustainable approach to energy use and thinking about the environment and, of course, the carbon footprint of the existing buildings and what we built as new. Much needed backup house support facilities, hugely important, including fit-for-purpose storage spaces for this incredible collection, along with an accessibility strategy, also very important, that provides for all visitors to easily navigate through the complex series of existing buildings. The project commenced on site in January, and we expect it to finish in about 2 years' time. And I'm glad to see Gráinne Shaffery here, because Shaffery architects, conservation architects, are a key component of our team and are helping us very much with this project, and we're delighted to be working with them. Comprising many parts from various periods, the gallery started out its life, as you can see, in this hilly landscape of Cork, represented by John Butt from 1760 as the Custom House. So we're talking about adaptability here. And I suppose what is missing from this image in the front is the Athenaeum, which arrived in 1885, then to become the Cork Opera House, later to be replaced by Michael Scott in 1965 after a tragic fire. The Custom House, in this image, you can see it demarcated in green, forming a U-shaped structure around a central courtyard. The 1884 Arthur Hill wing, completed to accommodate the Cork School of Art, shown in yellow, included a recladding of the Custom House from the Belvelly brickworks in Cork Harbour, on the Great Island in Cork Harbour. And 1919 sees the construction of the distinctive Gibson galleries, shown in red, followed much later in 2000 with an interesting extension by Eric van Egeret, filling the last remaining open space to complete the puzzle. So that brick uniformity of Belvelly bricks on the exterior hides a diverse range of interior spaces. This image captures only some of those, which gives the gallery its very special character and is very much appreciated by visitors, and something we did not wish to lose. In fact, we saw our role as adding more characters to this, shall we say, smorgasbord of very interesting rooms. And I suppose what's very interesting about the gallery is that it's got an intimacy and a domestic scale which reflects the provenance of the collection, much of which comes from private individuals donated from their sort of hallways and their living rooms. So some of the spaces we feel are very much appropriately scaled to the nature of the work that's on show. To provide the much needed additional space, we approached the task in a manner of acupuncture, taking pressure off the existing constructions by inserting a new component housing the supporting uses, and in the process releasing existing spaces in the historic fabric for the enjoyment of the public and for visitors. The sequence above and the section below show the removal of the 20th century workshop and some plant rooms to carefully insert what we described as a vessel of the imagination, adding approximately 1,000 square meters of much needed new space to host most of the support spaces, including state-of-the-art storage, crowned with a new gallery overlooking the city. The bottom image describes the wish to open up to the city, making a more generous and accessible ground floor, a courtyard or top-lit hall in the centre welcomes visitors, giving access to all of the upper levels via a grand staircase and a large lift. I'm nearly finished now. On the ground floor, a relocated main entrance replaces the former cafe, which is now accessed from a transformed garden and threshold space on Emmett Place, which we're designing with Bernard Seymour Landscape Architects. And this is a very important component in the accessibility to the gallery and recenters it on Emmett Place. The cafe is relocated to animate Half Moon Street at the rear. And that's a quiet laneway, which will provide another entrance to the building, make it more porous and accessible. So the visitor's arrival, as you can see in this right-hand image, is in a light-filled kind of courtyard, which draws visitors up through the building to access the galleries above. And this is an important nexus in the whole building and an anchor point where people come and go, and will also provide an opportunity for recitals and gatherings and other events. The historic facades will be restored and upgraded as part of the conservation and environmental works, and here we're working very closely with Shaftesbury Architects, extending to the 21st century wing, by Eric van Egrid, which we're also approaching as a conservation project. The new extension is centred on the Custom House and marks the main entrance, and is inspired by the pattern of previous architects in 1885 who sought to harmonise the various parts of the building, and we're proposing to use a similar brick for the new extension. And finally, the bottom image shows the Crawford in festive mood, which we would have hoped for last evening, but unfortunately we're deprived of that opportunity, and the square in front becoming a kind of a front room to the gallery in the city, marked by a grand window of the new extension overlooking that space. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard, for detailing such a sensitive treatment of this Grand Dam of Cork. And finally, I'd like to invite Valerie Mulvin of McCullough Mulvin Architects to present to us on McCullough Mulvin's renovation and transformation of a very dear Dublin institution, the Central Hotel. Thanks, Valerie.
Morning, everybody. Can you hear me? This one here. Is that better? Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity, the invitation to come here and talk about the Central Hotel. I think we're talking about public culture in this situation, because really we're talking about the culture of architecture in the anonymous parts of the city. This is a project that was a fantastic, very challenging one. It ran over several owners for over 10 years. As many of these projects do, they involve patience and care and time more than anything else. And we love this building because it represents all the anonymous things you have in a city: the grain, the plots, the intensity, the permeability, and the possibility of a secret life in a crowd. So it's made on a very significant corner, South Great George's Street and Exchequer Street. And when we were doing some excavations as part of the work, we even found the yard wall of the medieval Exchequer building in our excavations. So the site plan drawing here, you can see at the top of it, there's a little section that looks down to Dame Street, and it just gives you the intensity of the building heights and this tiny courtyard. So it's a real kind of 19th century city sort of image. And then I'll just go back one, if I can do that. The next block, the South City Markets building, was, of course, revolutionary when it was built in 1881. It's effectively a new topology of a shopping centre. And this block across the street, by Miller and Symes from 1887, also had a thoroughly modern brief, with shops at the ground level and mezzanines over them, and a hotel over the whole thing. So in a way, it's a bit like a reversal of what Graham was talking about 90% of the value being on the ground floor, because in this instance, it's quite the opposite. So it's a very London and Paris idea. It's great that it's not a reused Georgian building. It's a 19th century building. A classic hotel is really a series of public rooms. It's a place to be anonymous, or a flaneur. So this is Walter Benjamin territory, really. It's not quite an arcade, but it's like it. So these are fluid spaces where you can pass from one street to the other without anyone challenging you. So from Dame Court, say, to South Great George's Street, where you can see if you know anyone as you go through, or you can sit entirely alone in a crowd over a quiet drink. So this is what public culture does. It makes a place for chance encounters. If you look at the plot lines, they were really important to us, and they're a relic of those former shops. The black double plot in the centre here is Yamamori, which wasn't part of our brief, it wasn't part of our site. Our clients didn't own it, and we had to work around it in plan and section. And the plots gave us varied rooms, lots of permeability, lots of doors, and as I said, you slip from one plot to the next quite seamlessly, and each one is kind of marked with the shadow of a wall or an opening. So we worked at all the edges. We brought light down from the courtyard above, very conscious of its importance as a huge city block. So it's a piece of the cultural life of the city, really. And especially when you come to the library bar, which is on the bottom slide is the first floor slide, the top one is the fourth floor. And the library bar is really where arts and media people used to meet in its old manifestation. We had to persuade the Hoxton people and our developer clients to keep it as a Dublin icon. Obviously there was pressure for bedroom numbers, and they had no idea of its importance in the city at all. So, but once they knew it, that prime little perch overlooking the two streets was restored in order to have a similar appearance to its ghost predecessor. And then on the fourth floor, intensifying the plan by finding an appropriate place to stitch in an extra story without taking away from the beautifully worked scale in the city. So we built a new level behind the front slope of the South Great George's Street facade and a full new roof pitch over Dame Court. So in key streetscape views on South Great George's Street, the additional volume isn't apparent at all, and then it becomes a contributor to the skyline as you move down Exchequer Street. On Dame Court, then also, we built a new vertical slot as a bookend where a single-storey building had been, and then a glass bridge just completes the circuit across the courtyard. And the section here gives you an active idea of that skyline of pitches. So from the left-hand side of the slide, the South Great George's Street side, where we built behind the front pitch in a single-storey little piece, and then on the Dame Court side, where we built the full roof pitch. And what we did in terms of materials, in terms of new materials, we wanted to identify very clearly that these were new materials, metal cladding, which blended with the red brick. We set it back from the edge a little bit, just very precisely judging it to create balconies and new windows, which were carefully chosen in terms of colours from street level to roof of this new perforated material. And we added planting to the courtyard, which obviously has a big impact on improving the amenity for bedrooms. And you can see in the cityscape view here, uninterrupted views really in the middle slide on the left-hand side. South Great George's Street, then the roof presented as a gable on the top left on Exchequer Street as you move kind of cinematographically around it, setting back for a balcony, reducing the massing on the skyline. And the courtyard then, in the next slides, identifies the new level with the strip of glazing through. And it also identifies the new story on the top with its very light glazing. And internally then, if you look at the bottom slides on the right, the new level kind of burrows into the previous roof space, and the trusses are woven through. So it's like as if you were living in a bridge. And we kind of liked that fantastic contrast between the authenticity of the trusses and the sort of make-believe of hotel bedrooms. But before we got to that point, of course, we had the meticulous paring back of the 1960s, 70s, 80s refurbishments, getting back to original timber partitions and trusses. It was an enormous challenge, obviously, to bring this up to brand standards, as they call them, of acoustics. In other words, that you can't even hear a plug being put into a bedroom next door to you. It involved enormous amounts of time on site, even with our excellent builders, Duggins, who really do understand conservation and why it's important. And following a total refurbishment of all of the mechanical services and insulation and what have you, we did achieve a BER A3 for the whole building, and it is very well insulated, it's acoustically very strong, and it's very carefully refurbished. And finally, just to talk about the sliver of the building on Dame Court, this was a single-storey shop where inside used to be, if anybody remembers inside. We made a new profiled metal and glass facade, which is 6 stories over ground, folded in opposite directions on each floor with windows stepped out for privacy. And you can see in this slide here what that looks like. So each layer it goes in the opposite direction to the one above it. And we had great fun with the perforated metal facade. So we took the Roke map of 1756 and we mapped out South Great George's Street and Exchequer Street and abstracted them into a metal plate as a series of kind of pixelated dots for buildings and spaces for streets. And that transitioning is now a little plaque on the outside of the building so people can get what we've done there. But what I like about that is that the modernity of facade is really grounded in the sense of Dublin City itself. And all of this, I have to say, is achieved with the very sympathetic support from Dublin City Council's Conservation Department. And lovely to see Niamh here this morning talking about projects. And it is important to say, as a commercial project, it was very hard to actually achieve all of this. It's really, really difficult. But at the same time, it's so fantastic to have been part of something that just restores something almost so that nobody knows anything has happened in it and has just become part of the city again, a very anonymous part of the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. It's really interesting to get an insight into an historic private rather than public commission and to see the detail of what you've achieved in this space. I'm going to ask Nikki, do we have time for questions? No. Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for such insightful and informative presentations, and to say what's striking is the absolute added value you are providing to the public by giving new life to these buildings and spaces and delivering in a very tangible way on European, national and regional policies for architecture. I'd like to ask Valerie a quick question, if that's okay, because Valerie, you've been an advocate, a very vocal advocate for reuse and adaptation, not only through your design practice, but through your writing, and more recently your exhibition, The Reason of Towns, with the Irish Architecture Foundation, which travelled nationally and to Scotland. So you might tell us a bit about that, given its relevance to our conversation today, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Fionnuala. Yeah, I think the idea about that was based on work I had done a long time back, which became a book called Approximate Formality. And that was really about just kind of chartering the amount of fantastic but wasted capital we have in our towns. We have many, many, many really beautiful planned towns in this country. Many of them are empty, and as Graham has said, much worse than York. In fact, it's quite comforting to feel that York is in such a bad state, because it makes me feel not quite so bad. But what we really want to do was to engage people in the possibility that you might think about living in these towns again, because they are a huge resource. And our quick estimate worked out that there was about 90,000 units of housing lying vacant, and that you could actually take those across the country, across the island of Ireland, and you could give them as great places for people to live, where they have a completely instant environment to live in. So all of these great marketplaces, all of these wonderful spaces for exchange and commerce could become public spaces where people live around them. And it just involves, as many people have been saying this morning, including Michiel, thank you, and the earlier presentations this morning, about a change of mindset and about how do you think about these things in a way that gets people saying, yeah, I could do that. That could be done in a different way. And it's not about when you do it, but it's about how you do it. It's not about would you do it at all. It has to be done. These are things that are falling to bits in front of our eyes. And I think that the exhibition was just about trying to encourage people in as many ways as possible. So we made films, we had models of things we've been doing over 30 years. Irish Architecture Foundation, particularly Emmett Scanlon, had and myself worked together on this to try and encourage people. We had films made of 10 architects who are doing work in the public and the private sector, which are just tiny interventions in these towns. And it's really a case of building by building, as Nikki and I have often talked about, just getting one thing or two things or three things to kind of make a little quorum that helps people feel that it might be possible. So I know we're short of time, but that's just a quick.
Thank you, Valerie, for that. Given our time constraint, I'm going to go straight to Michiel, if that's okay, and ask you if you can tell us how architects can inform how we grow a shared culture of high quality architecture and design so that everyone can benefit.
That's a very difficult question, actually.
No.
First and foremost, I guess, but it is partly an answer to your question, but also opening up another debate. Either work should launch a proposition in relation to in what manner the future building will cater the public domain and the public interest. And if this proposition is formulated well, and if the proposition is also supported by private investors, private parties investing in a new development, it offers a means to have multiple stakeholders involved in a project. Because the projects I've shown this morning, only 2 of these projects were publicly funded. All the other projects were privately funded. And by establishing, for instance, the inner square in the Gare Maritime, or establishing the covered public garden in the Nantes project, or the series of courts in Deventer, everybody eventually understood why the city or why the private investor would invest in a particular manner in such a place and on such a particular spot on Earth. And by doing so, eventually the cultural mission, but also the cultural ambition or the cultural proposition, was embraced by everybody and provided a kind of new energy, new support, and made these projects happen.
Yeah.
Is that an answer?
I think that's a great answer to leave us with today, and thank you. And I think we should all bear in mind Graham's call to action as well. So thank you all very much for your contributions, and also thanks to Nikki and Emmeline for all your support for today. Thank you.